So hello, thank you for inviting me today. This is my first conference presentation, so I'm pretty terrified right now, so I'm not going to lie to you. My name's Ellie Whittaker. I've just graduated with a Masters in Sports Psychology from Liverpool John Moores University. And even though I'm presenting under John Moores' umbrella, I'm now at Edge Hill University, trying to finish, hopefully in 3 years, a PhD in absolutely nothing to do with football. I'm working in cardiac rehab. So that's my background. And I'm going to talk to you about the EPPP, which I'll go on to here. So, background to this study. About 12 months ago, League Football Education came up to John Moores and said, we want an evaluation of the support network for elite youth players. Of course, in this country, current estimations between 85 and 95 to 99% of players will be released at the age of 18. League Football Education wanted to know, is what we're doing at the minute effective? Is it the right thing to do? And what else can we do to help them? Okay, so that's the background to the research. Regarding the EPPP, I'm sure a lot of you are aware in the media, it is the football equivalent of Marmite. Okay, so you either love it or you hate it. Brentford and Yeovil are two of the clubs that have closed their academies, citing EPPP concerns as a major factor contributing to the closure. Additionally, the BBC, 3 years ago, they did some research into what the clubs thought of the EPPP. So they managed to get contact with 48 of the Football League clubs and said, what do you think of the EPPP? Half of them said, specifically League One and League Two clubs, said, we weren't in favour of it, but we voted for it anyway. I'll leave you to decide why they voted for it. But to date, nobody has investigated the impact of the EPPP as far as we know. So this is the first to do that. There has been some research released last year in the Journal of Sports Sciences, which is a physiology paper, discussing that if players receive training schedules that are below the EPPP stipulations, so they're receiving less training time than the EPPP stipulates, their perceptions of well-being are decreased, so the sleep quality is compromised, the recovery is compromised, and various psychological and physiological factors are at risk. Okay, so that is the background to this research. So, a bit of background to the EPPP. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there's a lot of double pass models throughout Europe. There's also one in Japan, and there's one in the Americas. Okay, so Relvast in 2010 did an evaluation of what these sort of talent and development models, what effect they're having across Europe. So that is the first research of this type. The EPPP extended the FA's Charter for Quality, and it's underpinned by 6 fundamental principles, which I'm not going to have time to go into, but practically, they categorise clubs into these 4 categories. So category 1, your Man Cities of this world, the optimum development centres, down to category 4, probably down into League 1, League 2. Okay? So it's edging towards a 10,000 hour rule. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the 10,000 hour rule, what it takes to become an expert in any chosen field. It's taking us towards that 10,000 hours, but it's stopping at about 8,500. That's a minimum. Okay? So clubs may be sending players to train much more than that. But that's the minimum operating standard of what is expected of them. So in a nutshell, in a very 1 minute window, that's what the EPPP is, okay? So, what I did. So the LFE, as I've previously said, they provided my access to participants. And due to the level of participants, I can't disclose any information about who they were, unfortunately, as I'm sure a few of you would love to know who they were. But we had people at all levels. So we had people in governance levels, so governing bodies, players' unions, things like that. We had the clubs, we had a range of different levels, from championship downwards. And we had private academies. So the organisations that are picking up the players who have been released in order to work out what could be done. Okay? And this bit in red at the top, that's what the LFE gave me to work with. We want you to evaluate the needs and expectations of released youth footballers. Go and do it. So this is what I came up with. So my interviews, all these 12 interviews, I was quite lucky that all my participants had a career in football that spanned before and after the EPPP. Some of them had up to 40 years of experience in the game. They'd been around a lot longer than I had. So they had a 22-year-old female walking into their environments and saying, right, tell me everything you know about youth football. What do you like? What don't you like? It's all confidential. So as I'll come on to in a minute, we got onto some pretty controversial topics, which is another reason why I can't disclose who my participants were. So we talked through their career in football. A lot of them had been released at the age of 18. What's different from now? So we had some academy managers who, as players, had been released at 18, went off to college, went off to university. How does that differ from them releasing players now? What effect does that experience have on them? As my background's in psychology, and Mark Nesty, who I'm sure a few of you are aware of, was on the supervision team, we discussed identity, the concept that footballers, because they're training this much, are only developing as footballers and not developing the bigger picture. Is that a problem? Is that problematic? How is that effective? And finally, we discussed in the instance of clubs, we discussed how they would release players, what decision-making process would happen, different factors like that. It was all semi-structured, so generally it was taken in whatever way the participant wanted to. I sat down with participants for up to 3 hours to discuss all of these things because they wanted to get a lot off their chest, so it's pretty interesting. So after all that, this is what we came up with. So this is our model. So as you can see at the top, there were some perceived benefits of the EPPP. So it provided an environment of shared best practice. So it allowed lower league clubs to identify what the higher level clubs had been doing. Had some player benefits. I'll go through all these in a minute. Okay, so there were some overarching benefits regarding the philosophy of a shared best practice and increased accountability, which are buzzwords dropped into a lot of elite level sport these days. However, there was a perception of a discrepancy between what the desired outcomes of the EPPP were and the actual outcomes. So if we look at this first desired level here, in a perfect world, what clubs, governance, everyone in elite football wanted was a two-way street between the governance level, so the governing bodies, people at the top of the game, the organisational level, which I'll come on to, which is the clubs, people on the ground tasked with delivering this programme, and the player level. They wanted communication between all three levels in an ideal world. However, in real life, that's not happening. It's a hierarchical relationship. You've got the governance dictating to the clubs, who then take this vague idea and dictate it to the players. Okay? So there's clearly a discrepancy between what the intentions of the EPPP were and what is actually happening. So benefits. Excuse the amount of text on the slide. I thought I had a bigger screen and I didn't know how else to do it. That went well. Okay, so the EPPP was perceived as creating an environment of shared best practice, as I've said before. League 2 clubs could buy into what Premier League clubs were doing, or not doing, as might be the case. This is also evident in Horrocks' study about Man United. It showed that research such as this can show what the higher level league clubs are doing, and lower league clubs can buy into the same process. Also professionalised the academy environment. It provided guidelines for what qualification staff would have. It gives pretty strict instructions about how qualified staff should be, which in turn has increased professionalism and increased accountability and transparency. As I'm sure you're aware, across football, across FIFA, there's been a lot of negative headlines, we'll put it that way, but this was perceived to be making sure that people who weren't doing what they said they were going to be doing were pulled up on it and would be penalised for it. So they were the perceived benefits of the EPPP. However, the other three themes that were pictured underneath in the previous slide were potentially undermining that. So the most salient perceived negative was the governance. So interestingly, when Jan was talking about governance before, this was the main factor that was undermining the success of the EPPP. This factor was repeatedly perceived to be the factor why the EPPP in this country is not having the desired outcomes. Okay, so there's a massive power imbalance between the Premier League, because of their recent TV deal, all their investment, all their money. They were perceived to be paying people off to go along with the EPPP, to sit down, shut up and get on with it. Okay? That came out time and again. This dominance of the Premier League was evident in 75% of the interviews, I'd say minimum. Okay? Also, because there's so many governing bodies, so we've got the FA, the PFA, LMA, LFE, all these acronyms, all these people are given a different message. So this was perceived to be making it unclear for the clubs, for people on the ground tasked with delivering it. They simply don't know whose advice to take. So yes, the EPPP is a Premier League programme, but should we listen to them or the FA as the governing body for football in this country? They simply didn't know. Okay? And this had led to the increase in disillusionment. Now, in the previous literature, Nesty and Sully, in a book released last year, contrasted the English model with the German model, and said that in Germany, they've been very successful having followed a double pass programme. And they've also shown that the philosophy in Germany is national team first, club second. In England, it's the complete antithesis of that. So we've got the clubs dictating to the national team and setting the agenda. The argument is, and my suggestion today is, until the philosophy in England matches the philosophy in European countries, the EPPP will not work and will not be effective, because we've still got the philosophy of we've got the club as most important and then the national team second. So that is the underlying suggestion. That's the take-home message of this research. Operational level. As a lot of these people had been in the game a long time, they preferred previous systems, though they didn't like the fact that the EPPP had thrown everything out to bring this completely new programme in. There was a massive fear for the future, so we had academy managers, in some cases, looking me in the face and saying, I am absolutely terrified of where this is going to go in the future. I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We've got all this money bandied about and we don't know what effect it's going to have. They're petrified, basically. And again, the cultural comparisons, as I mentioned, contrasting Germany with England. And then finally, there was the staff issues. The EPPP, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, has created what they call a paper trail, which is positive in some aspects, because players, upon being released, can say, give me a breakdown of why I was released, when I didn't do what you wanted me to do. And the clubs can go, here's a dossier of you from under 9s to under 18s. This is everything you've done. You can use that as a CV now to go to other clubs or academies, private academies, and say, this is what I've done in my 9 years with this club, and take me or leave me, that's it. The qualifications was pretty controversial as well. So staff, according to the EPPP stipulations, have to have a specific qualification to take each role. However, this was perceived to be making it difficult for former players who may have craft knowledge but don't have the academic or the qualifications that the EPPP stipulates. It was difficult for them to get a job because they hadn't had time, because they'd been playing full time. Yeah. Finally, the player level. Disappointing players too early. We've all heard the headlines of people getting released at the age of 11, being terrified, freezing, not being able to perform. This was happening time and again. This was perceived to be happening time and again. There was a lack of support, which is potentially the most salient, having heard Clark Carlisle talk next door in the previous session. Some academy manager talked about it's going to take someone get released on the Friday, and by the weekend they've committed suicide. That's what's going to happen until we're shamed into doing anything about this. So that is, unfortunately, that's what the stage we're at, where nothing's going to change until people are shamed into doing it. That's the perception at the minute. And finally, the style of play. Carlin and Collins, in their Journal of Sports Science paper 2 years ago, they said that the EPPP is producing the player that the English media maligns and gets on the back of time and again, who's not got any flair. If we've got this programme that's stipulating every single thing that the club needs to be doing, aren't we going to be continually reproducing that player all over again? Okay, so the conclusions. The philosophy was perceived favourably. However, particularly the governance factors were undermining the successfulness, which was then having a trickle-down effect. It's making the people at the operational levels life difficult, and is having implications for player success. Okay, so as I said, we used quite a diverse sample because in first and foremost it was a consultancy piece. So they dictated who I would interview. So in the future, in a perfect world, I'd like to do longitudinal research where we can go into someone and say, tell me what you think of the EPPP. They might do what they did in this instance and got everything off the chest and tell me everything, chuck the kitchen sink at me again. If I go in 6 months' time and ask them the same questions or similar and say, 6 months ago you said this, is this still the case? That's what we might want to do in the future. Okay? So references. Oh, any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay.